Hello, everybody. This is Rumble, and I'm Michael Moore. Thank you for tuning into my podcast today. This is episode 70. 70 episodes since we began on December 17th, 4 months ago. So thank you to all of you who've been with me from the beginning, and for those of you who just joined me, welcome. We hit our 8 millionth listener, our 8 millionth download this past weekend. 8 million in less than 4 months. Amazing. Thank you. I have with me a very special guest, one of the great thinkers in this country, and certainly one of the great activists for decades. Someone who has led many fights for all the good people and all the good causes. He is a voice, I think, for many, many people. He is a professor of public philosophy at Harvard University. He's a professor emeritus at Princeton. That's a lot of Ivy going on there. If you've ever met him or seen him, Ivy is not what runs through his veins. He has so much compassion and love and fight in him for all the rest of us. And I'm grateful to have him on my show. I'm going to ring him up on the phone. It's how we're going to have to do this today in the pandemic era of podcasts. So I'm going to just call him up here on my iPhone. I'll have the luxury of having my microphone here in my little podcast studio, but he will not. So I think I'm just going to put the iPhone right up to the microphone. I think this is, my apologies in advance. It's not the optimal sound, but it is how things used to sound before the iPhone and before all this technology. And, we're all working with what we can do here right now. So let me get him on the phone. In the meantime, let me tell you a little bit about one of our underwriters for this episode today. Our new underwriter is Audible. This is the audiobook company. Probably now more than ever, it's a wonderful time to listen to an audiobook. I can tell you the books I've read and have then listened to on Audible, it's so much better. For instance, Bob Dylan's Chronicles Volume 1, that's his autobiography. To listen to the audiobook of that with Sean Penn reading Bob Dylan's autobiography, it's just brilliant. It's a wonderful way to reach people. I've recorded many of my own books with my own voice. It's a wonderful experience. And as a special offer to my listeners, they have a sign-up thing here where you can get a free book. Get one of my books. Anyways, if you want to sign up for that or to get any one of the many free books that they offer, you just have to go to audible.com/rumble, or you can text them. You just got to text the word Rumble to 500. Text in the word Rumble, and you'll be signed up for a trial offer and a free book. So support them. They support me, and I'm grateful to them for allowing a voice like mine to be heard in a time like this.
When I did the last time I was in Flint and I introduced myself, I said, I'm in the city of D.D. Bridgewater and Betty Carter. They are so much a part of me, but I got some Michael Moore inside of me too. That's right on the tape. Before I went in to talk about Bernie coming out of the Jewish section of Brooklyn and all of the wonderful ways in which he exemplified so much of the best of that secular Jewish tradition. He's my dear brother, and he's a human being, so we criticize him and make him accountable like everybody else, but at the same time, you're honest about the deep love and respect that I have for him, that I have for you, and I have for others as well.
No, thank you. No, thank you for that. That was so kind and generous of you to say that, and thank you for going to Flint, by the way, and mentioning those two great singers that are also from Flint. Cornel, seriously, we're in some deep shit.
Telling the truth. Brother.
I know, but
telling the truth.
I need you, and we need you to help figure this out. And I think a lot of people listening to this, I've heard from many, many, many people in the last 10 days, 2 weeks, whatever it is, with Bernie out of the race, and now officially out of the race and endorsing Senator or Vice President Biden. People don't know what to do. They don't know where to go. They believed in the concept of it was a movement, more so even than it was just a campaign, and that it was about us. And of course, Bernie, we know Bernie. We've known him for many years. And when he says that, it's not about me, it's about us. It's not some branding cliche.
That's right.
That is who he is and has always been. And so I think people are a little down and depressed and wondering where to go and what to do. But the larger thing I want to talk to you about in the time that we have here is the as I've been calling it on the podcast, we have 3 viruses that we're fighting right now. One is the coronavirus, obviously. Every one of us needs to stay alive and do what we need to do that. Number 2 is the Trump virus. That has to be removed as quickly as possible. It may not be until November, but it has to be in November. And then finally, the larger virus that was around long before Trump, the virus of greed, of capitalism, of a system that made sure that only the few benefited from it, and the many were to serve the few and to scramble for the crumbs that were left on the table. And so that's the larger virus that I think is at the core of everything, including the fact that we should even have as many people dying as we have dying right now, in part because the so-called leadership refused to do anything about it, didn't want to hurt the poll numbers, was worried more about the stock market, and also doesn't believe in science. And so here we are. And Cornel, I mean, I just got a notice here from the apartment building today. They probably won't like me saying this, but I don't care. I'm tired of everybody talking quietly about everything here. And they just got, telling us that, there's another person in the building here that's been tested positive, and they're, doing everything they can to help that person and make sure that they're quarantined away from everybody else in the building. But, people are totally in a state of confusion, panic, despair, demoralization. And I know you've run into similar people in these last few weeks. And what are you saying to them? What can you say to the people listening here? What can you say to me? Because I'm one of those people too. I'm living through this. I'm trying to survive. I don't want to die. I just turn the microphone over to you.
Yeah, one is I love the way you formulate the 3 different viruses. But as you know, my brother, I always begin with the primacy of the spiritual and the moral as we engage in political struggle against empire, predatory capitalism, white supremacy, mass supremacy, homophobia, transphobia, and so on. So the fundamental question for me, and the way it's an echo question that Beethoven wrestled with over and over again in his works, early, the great string quartet, in which you see you wrestling with despair, death, and on intimate terms, the catastrophe. And his question is, how do we look unflinchingly and candidly in the face of the grimness and the bleakness of the world of massive suffering and misery, and still muster the courage to love, beauty, truth, neighbor, justice, and myself as a Christian, love the holy, love God? So you see, that's the question of courage. And it comes in all forms, in secular forms and religious forms and so forth. But it's a matter of courage. Do we have the courage to be honest about just how grim our situation is? And it was very grim before the physical virus hit.
Right.
Very, very bleak before coronavirus hit with the other viruses that you're talking about. See? And yet at the same time, not in any way be paralyzed or debilitated, but actually still be buoyed up enough and revitalized enough to love the truth to love the truth enough to tell it, to love justice enough to seek it, and most importantly, to love people and the least of these, oppressed, wretched of the earth enough to serve and sacrifice. And so it becomes a spiritual question of what kind of human being we're going to be. I was just reading this powerful piece by Brother Ajumu Baraka of the Black Alliance for Peace. You can see his energy. You can see his vitality in trying to tell the truth about the American empire, predatory capitalism, white supremacy, and so forth. Similarly so in terms of various musicians. Musicians now are producing different pieces, beautiful pieces, trying to muster the energy and the vitality not to be debilitated in the face of overwhelming despair and despondency. And so we need each other. We need each other's words. We need each other's examples. But we also need examples from the past. Now, as you know, my brother, I come from a blues people. Right? 244 years of white supremacist slavery, then another 100 years of Jim Crow neo-slavery, and then after 1975 and 80, here comes the new Jim Crow, which is another form of neo-slavery. In the midst of that kind of catastrophe, in the midst of that kind of massive suffering, how does one muster the kind of joy required to keep moving, the kind of commitment to something bigger than oneself, freedom, justice, equality, democracy, God, whatever it is? And those are spiritual and moral questions. And there's no answer to them in a theoretical way. The only answer is through example. The only answer is through touch. The only example is through agents rendered in stories. So we tell stories about heroic hope. We tell narratives of hope who served and sacrificed and so forth. And that's one reason why I started off reflecting with you, my brother, not because I'm in any way deifying you or fetishizing you, but you are a human being that I love and respect because of your willingness to get up every morning in a blues-like situation and sing the blues. As long as you're singing the blues, you're not succumbing to the blues, because as long as you got song inside of you, you got commitment, you got energy, you got vitality. So you can hold the blues off by singing that blues. And that's what so many of your films are about. You singing the blues. Well, let me tell you how bad it is, but also let you know that no matter how bad it is, no matter how these neo-fascists are of our ruling class like Trump, or these milquetoast neoliberals or the other side of the ruling class like Biden and others, crushing Bernie at the moment, trying to somehow render invisible too much of the suffering in terms of their own narrow paradigms, how do we still tell that truth? And tell the truth in such a way that we acknowledge, yes, we know that milquetoast neoliberals like Biden are better than vicious neo-fascists like Trump. But we still have to be honest about who Biden is, architect of the largest prison system in the history of the modern world, and we're still bragging about it just a few years ago with the new Jim Crow, invasion and occupation of Iraq. That's over 1 million precious Iraqis who died. They'll never come back. No serious apology, no serious reflection in a substantive way about it. Unleashing Wall Street greed. We can go on and on and on. But at the same time, we also are in such a grim moment with fascists in the White House that if we're going to have an anti-fascist coalition, then Trump has still got to go. Ecological catastrophe impending, possible nuclear catastrophe, and then the other catastrophes of wealth inequality, decrepit schools, mass incarceration, domestic violence, and so forth. And so, for me, this notion of even voting for, the vote is just one moment in a much, much larger question of what it means to be a decent human being in a decaying empire, what it means to be a fellow citizen in a democracy that is undergoing deep, formation and decay and deterioration. So that there's no doubt for me that I don't, as we're part of a movement on the ground, grassroots, we tell the truth about Biden. We tell the truth about those around him. That includes Obama. And that's one of the challenges that Brother Bernie had. How could he tell the truth about Biden without being too critical of Obama when Obama is 95, has a 94% popularity rating in the Democratic Party? Now, you and I, we've told truths about Obama. We've gotten in deep trouble telling those truths about Obama from Democrats and others. But we have to be able to tell people the truth if you're going to respect them, and yet at the same time not lose sight of the humanity of Brother Biden, the humanity of Brother Obama, and recognize the ways in which they have contributed to drones and war crimes and Wall Street expansion and domination and so forth. Now, at this particular moment, where fascism is such a live option, that I have no trouble whatsoever providing a vote for a neoliberal disaster like Biden to push out a neo-fascist catastrophe like Trump. But I'm not going to do it by telling lies about Biden. That's why I went at my dear brother John Lewis the other day, and I love John Lewis. He's one of the great heroes. He's one of the great freedom fighters in the 1960s. But now, engaging in this neoliberal chatter about Biden is a great man of courage, great man of conscience, he will make a great president, that's a lie. Don't lie to the people, my brother John. And I love you to death, and I'm praying for you as you wrestle with this cancer. But in the name of Martin Luther King Jr., in the name of Fannie Lou Hamer, don't tell people lies. Biden is not a great man of conscience and courage. Not at all. He's a mediocre politician who conformed to neoliberal policy, willing to make alliances with right-wing Strom Thurmonds and others to constitute the foundations of a prison system that continues to haunt and hunt down too many poor people and black people. So the question here goes back to Beethoven, though, brother. How do we unflinchingly tell the truth about the grimness, but don't allow despair to have the last word, be able to move and groove in an improvisational way in order to be part of an anti-fascist coalition? An anti-fascist coalition means there's going to be many of your political foes who are part of that coalition. Brother Biden will never be a political friend of mine. I mean, as a Christian, I love him, and he's made in the image of God just like me and you, but he's been a foe for a long time. He's on the other class divide. I have a critique of the ruling class across the board. The neo-fascist wing of Trump, the neoliberal wing of Biden and Clinton and Obama. But at the same time, I've got to be able to maneuver in such a way that the worst of the worst of the ruling class, which is the neo-fascist wing, does not rule again. And here I do resonate with my dear brother Chomsky. I really do. That another 4 years of Trump, you're talking about probably the planet possibly going under. There's a possibility that you never know with nuclear catastrophe. You never know with escalating ecological catastrophe.
I'm so moved by what you're saying and how you're able to lay it out, to lay the whole map out, and the most important thing, to not lie to people.
Absolutely.
It doesn't mean that it has so little to do with, are you going to vote for Biden? I think we all made that clear. Bernie made it clear. Yes, whoever the nominee is. And I think in one of the polls, somebody ran a poll with Trump versus that Roomba, that robot that vacuums your floor on its own, and the Roomba won. So I'm just saying, I think we're kind of all on that page of if it was the Roomba versus Trump, we're all down with the Roomba.
Wow.
But having said that,
but what's so sad though, brother, is that there were significant slices of the neoliberal wing of the ruling class in the Democratic Party that was willing to go with Trump over Brother Bernie.
Yes.
And
yes.
see, that just lets you know right up front, wait a minute, these neoliberals talk about diversity and race and class, and sexual orientation. Their fundamental commitment is to the rule of capital, is to the profit motive, is tied to the Wall Street greed that's pushing us to the edge already. They were going to let Brother Bernie go under?
In case people have forgotten, back 4 months ago, just 4 months ago, both Hillary Clinton, separately, Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden, when asked, said that they would not commit if Bernie was the nominee to vote for him, to endorse him, to back him. Not, meaning, in other words, they would rather have 4 more years of Trump than Bernie Sanders, because Bernie to them represented the true threat to their moneyed interests. And that their moneyed interests reigns supreme, even if it means 4 more years of Trump. It was, even though I wasn't and shouldn't have been surprised, it was a stunning public admission by both Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden that they would not necessarily vote for Bernie Sanders if he were the nominee, that they would tolerate 4 more years of Trump because it would protect their interests and the interests of the ruling class support that they have.
And one wonders where Brother Obama was on this. I know he probably played some role in the background in terms of his relation to Pete. Brother Pete Buttigieg is like family to me. You know, Brother Pete's father was my close partner, Joseph Buttigieg, who translated Gramsci into English. And so Brother Pete is always like family to me. But I got a critique of my dear Brother Pete as neoliberal. But his relation to Obama, Amy's relation to Obama, how the neoliberal establishment came together so quickly right when we were celebrating after Nevada.
Well, no, it was on the move. It was a landslide in Nevada. That's the only candidate ever in the history of this country to win, when it was a contested primary, to win the first 3 primaries and caucuses, to win the popular vote, the first 3 in a row. Never had happened. Bernie Sanders did it, and it flipped them out. And they were like, and I mean, they were even on mainstream media. They were talking about Bernie as the presumed front runner, as the potential nominee of the party. And they had to work very quickly to circle the wagons around Joe Biden. You know, we'll find out later what was offered to all of them.
We'll find out what the truth really were. But we would also have to go to the upper echelons of MSNBC and their role as neoliberal propagandists, trashing Bernie. We'd have to go see what CNN was about. I think CNN might be a little bit more loose in that regard, but still with so many moments in CNN where they were just trashing Bernie directly. You said to yourself, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Are you a propaganda machine or are you a news?
Not just all of them, but all the media was pretty much down with this, with the playbook of this can't happen. And
yes. Thank God for Sister Amy. Thank God for Sister Amy and the Democracy Now.
Yeah, Amy Goodman. Yeah, not Amy Klobuchar. Yeah, Amy Goodman.
Oh no, I'm talking about my I'm talking about my comrade. I did this with me. Definitely.
Yeah, but other than Amy Goodman and a few online publications that I encourage people to read. Other than that, in the mainstream media, we really didn't. Those voices weren't heard, and occasionally you and I got on. MSNBC was very good.
Brother Anderson has always been kind to me, and Brother Don Lemon has been.
Yeah, Don Lemon is good too. Yeah,
that's to have me on. That's very, very true.
And when we say they're good, they're not. They don't necessarily agree with us, but they give us the chance to speak.
Absolutely,
and
that's right.
I'm grateful to that, and I've been grateful to Chris Hayes for that. I'm grateful to other people there. Ali Velsh's been good. So we find the good in all of them, but throughout the mainstream media, it was a nonstop. It was like Sherman's March to the Sea.
Bombardment of propaganda against not just Brother Bernie, but the issues that we're raising. Yeah. God, right to health care, job with a living wage, some kind of access to housing of quality.
But Cornel, how are you going to pay for that? How are you going to pay for that? How are you going to pay for that? And, and it's so ironic now. Here we are, literally just weeks later, and nobody would dare ask the question, how are you going to pay for that in terms of getting us through this pandemic?
That's exactly right.
It's like, wow, well, we don't have that money. And then all of a sudden, well, we have the money.
and then the second move was, you're putting too much stress on the government. What makes you think the government can be a force for public good and common good? We need to look to the markets. The markets are going to be the mechanism to deal with most of these problems. Part of the neoliberal ideology, part of the old capitalist ideology that goes back to the founding of the country. You say, well, wait a minute. Isn't it interesting? When there's a crisis for Wall Street, they look to government. But when poor people have chronic crisis and look to government, they look to be lazy. They look to somehow being anti-market. Now, we know we're in a major grim moment, and if we don't look to government, if we don't look to public institutions, we are going under. And what institution do we actually depend on more than any other? The military, which is the most socialist institution in the country. You see, we don't outsource that one. We don't look for markets for the Army and Navy and so forth. It is government, and we bring in the military, bring their military hospitals. Thank God for them at this particular moment. But we need an analysis of America as an empire, America as a predatory capitalist civilization, and the countervailing forces against it. The anti-racist, the anti-sexist, the working class movement, the anti-homophobic ones. But without making that larger connection, brother, we're going to end up with another neoliberal move in the name of diversity with the black folk and the women and the gay brothers and lesbian sisters included within the imperial and class hierarchy. And lo and behold, most of the masses of people get pushed back. And this is why the issue of race is so very important within the Democratic Party. And that's one reason why the Democratic Party cannot have a Socratic dialogue or critical reflection on the Obama legacy. They won't allow it. He's untouchable. He's like a Delphic oracle. He's like a political pope. He's untouchable. You can't say anything critical about it. And that's very much, it was very difficult to say anything critical about him in the campaign, you remember?
I did.
I said some, but I held off because I wanted people to really gain access and focus on Brother Bernie and his vision and what we're about. If I brought in Obama, they said, oh, there's old West again. He's an Obama hater. No, I'm a hater of injustice, be it Wall Street, greed, or be it drone stuff. Don't let people in Yemen and Pakistan and Afghanistan and other places.
In my last film, I put the scene in there that the mainstream media was all there filming it, and no one ever showed it, of him going to Flint and fake drinking the water to tell.
That's a powerful moment, brother.
It's
a powerful moment.
It was the saddest thing. It's a majority black audience of Flint residents, and he's telling them it's safe to drink the water when the water itself, as I was told later, was brought from Air Force One that landed in Flint. They brought the clean water for him when he asked for a glass of water. All of us in Flint, we all knew. So we're in this high school, essentially, that was being closed down. And they had shut the water off in the school. There hadn't been water there in like over a year. Like no cooking, the toilets. Only the toilets had water in it so they could use the toilets. That was it. And so when they went and they ran and they got him in a minute, they got him a glass of clean water. Where? Forget about clean, any water. There was no water. So I put that in the film, and it really upset people. But this is what I said, Cornel, and I said it during Bernie's campaign. It's the fact that I love Obama, that I still remember tearing up in the voting booth, being able to vote in my lifetime in America for a black man for president, and for a man whose name wasn't Barry, but right there on the ballot, Barack Hussein Obama. That we'd come somehow that far. And so, but it is out of love that it's only your friends. It's only the people that really love you are the ones who can say to you, you're messing up. You're wrong.
Exactly.
You did the wrong thing, Barack Obama. And that's an act of love. That's not me hating Obama. I don't hate Obama. I love Obama, And because I love Obama, I want Obama to be everything that Obama wishes he was and wanted to be.
I think that one of the undeniable things about Brother Barack and Sister Michelle is the unadulterated, unconditional love that they have for both of their precious daughters. And as you know, Malia's a student right here at Harvard, and she's a magnificent student. She's a wonderful student. She's critically engaged and so forth. And so anytime you're loving people, you stand in contact with their humanity. Love Barack, love Michelle, protect them, respect them, but also correct them. And the correction is because you're loving folks who are also not just bigger than them, but you're loving your hundreds and thousands and millions of folks that made it possible for them to gain access to it. You know, when I saw Brother Barack right there on CNN that night in 2008, I had tears in my eyes.
Yeah.
But I had tears in my eyes for my grandmothers and grandfathers. I had tears in my eyes for Frederick Douglass, and Ida B. Wells Barnett, and for Martin King and Fannie Lou Hamer and Stokely Carmichael and Diane Nash. All of those rich tradition, this black freedom struggle, this great modern, maybe the greatest modern tradition of spiritual fortitude and moral courage for 400 years hated, still dishing out love warriors. Terrorized all these decades, after decades, still dishing out folk who want freedom for everybody, not to terrorize back. No black versions of the Ku Klux Klan in the black freedom movement. You see what I mean? That's what I was crying for. And then I said to myself, I hope he understands the burden. Not a burden of perfection, but being true to Martin. Don't just put his picture or put his statue in the Oval Office. Be true to his struggle against militarism, against poverty, against racism, against Jim Crow, new Jim Crow, old Jim Crow, against materialism, the culture of superficial spectacle and image, and people all obsessed with celebrity and so forth. And all of those traps, unfortunately, neoliberal administration on Obama fell under. And by bringing in Brother Biden, what did he do? He provided a halo over Biden. So it was primarily the black folk who pushed Biden into this position that he's in right now. It was Clyburn and the others that pushed him in. They were the catalyst, as it were, to open up. And that's what it was upsetting to me, as you know, deeply upsetting to me. Because I love black folk unconditionally, and I don't ask them to love me back. They worthy of being loved, and I'm going to tell them the truth when I think they're conformists to an unjust status quo. I'm going to tell them the truth when they're cowardly and don't want to tell the fundamental truths about how they're complicitous with a system that has lost sight of the humanity of so many poor and working people, disproportionately black and brown. And so that's a critique of the black bourgeoisie. That's a critique of the black professional class. That's a critique of the black chattering class, obsessed with careerism and opportunism, and so many of them willing to sell out, as we saw with Bloomberg and as we saw with other candidates when they came along with big money and status. And we're seeing this now with Biden. All the lies being told about Biden. You got folks talking about, oh, he's been a major advocate for the downtrodden all of his life. Get off the crack pipe, Brother Dyson and others. Please. Biden ain't never been a major advocate for the downtrodden. You just want access to his status hierarchy and so forth. So that it's a matter of telling the truth. Who's going to tell the truth? And without telling the truth, the people perish, my brother.
That's right. And
where there is no vision, people perish. I'm biblical. Thank God for our Jewish brothers and sisters laying that down in the scripture.
Representative Jim Clyburn is the number one recipient of money from Big Pharma in the United States Congress. And I'm talking about of Democrats and Republicans. Wow. He receives more money from the Big Pharma lobby.
Tell the truth, my brother.
I know, and people, yeah, but he's done all this other good, and he's done these good.
But journalism itself is so dead. How come the journalists don't say that?
Why don't they say it?
That on television. Why don't they talk about that in the New York Times? Why don't they talk about that in the Washington Post? You see what I mean?
You know, here's the thing: if they were doing a story on somebody in the say the New York Times, and they said their name, James Thompson. Let's just make up a name here. James Thompson, who was responsible for the deaths of 7 children in 1975.
Right.
Every time James Thompson's name would be mentioned, I don't mean that he killed the kids, but that he, maybe was the principal of a school, and he knew that there was a problem with this chemical leak. Didn't do anything about it. 7 children died, and for the rest of his life, if he ever appeared in the media again, there would be a comma after his name, and it would say, whose actions resulted in the deaths of 7 children. I would like a media that starts to do a similar thing with our politicians. So when you see Representative James Clyburn, comma, the number one recipient of campaign contributions from the pharmaceutical industry, comma, that should follow him wherever he goes. People need to know he may say something good, he may do something good, but he is also, more so than any Republican and any Democrat in Congress, the number one recipient of money from one of the most evil industries and institutions. When I say evil, let me get this straight. We need medicine. We need medicine. All right?
Yes.
But in other countries, they don't set up their medical system as a for-profit enterprise. They know that people need medicine, and so they make sure that the medicine is provided. If you get a prescription in the United Kingdom and you need anything from the super strength Tylenol to HIV medication, no prescription can be more than 12 pounds. 12 pounds, $20. That's it. Whether it's $1,000 HIV medication or a $25 super Tylenol. And the fact that we do this here, and this is what so depressed me the other day when Biden and Bernie were on the screen, and they talked about they formed 6 task forces amongst their campaign people. And they're going to come together. They're going to come together and come up with some really good stuff regarding criminal justice, regarding climate change, regarding income inequality. There were 6 topics like that. I kept waiting to hear it, and I never heard it. Healthcare was not one of them. It blew my mind. And
no foreign policy either. No foreign policy either.
Yeah, no, yes, right. That's another whole thing. But
yeah.
I hear you. And so Bernie threw him a couple softballs and got Biden on board the $15 an hour minimum wage. Got Biden on board for free tuition at public universities. Right. Biden wants to cap it at, like, if your parents make more than, I don't know, $150,000 a year combined income, you can pay for it. But we'll get into that some other time, why that's even wrong, because you want, even the wealthy, never the public school should ever charge a dime to anybody. You should never introduce anything into a public system, whether it is the library, whether it is the public schools, whether it's the fire department. You don't say that, well, after a certain income, you got to pay. No. After a certain income, we've made sure that you're paying a lot in taxes, and that's how you're going to pay for it. That's how you're going to pay for it. But anyways, I didn't know if you saw that, but I
tell you this, though, brother, in relation to Brother Clyburn. God bless him. I know he just lost his.
No, I know. I can tell you 10 great things about him.
Oh no, because he's a human being. We got to keep him accountable. But when I look at it through the lens of the Black freedom struggle, though, brother, we have always had Black voices to be critical when certain Black figures have become too well adjusted to injustice or started selling out. Henry Highland Garnett called Frederick Douglass a lackey of the American Empire when Douglass called for the annexation of the Dominican Republic to be part of the United States. Now, you see,
I didn't know that.
Oh, yes. I talk about it in Black Prophetic Fire, my book. And David Platt talks about it in his book on Douglass. Douglass was as great as they come, but he still needed accountability. Fannie Lou Hamer brought critique to bear on Martin Luther King Jr. when Martin Luther King Jr. sided with Hubert Humphrey and LBJ against the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party of black folk. With Bob Moses and others. And Sandy said, "You're wrong, Martin. You're wrong. I'm questioning America. I'm questioning you." That doesn't mean that she was trashing Martin.
Right.
And Martin turned out and said, "See what I mean? William Monroe Trotter of the Guardian. His Guardian went all the way up until he committed suicide in 1934. He was critical of other black leaders, not just Booker T. Washington. He was critical of W.B. Du Bois. He was critical of Kelly Miller. That's why I like Black Agenda Report with Glenn Ford and Margaret Kimball in them. You got black voices that are keeping some of the black neoliberals accountable when these black neoliberals act as if they're untouchable. And it's not just Obama, it's a whole black neoliberal political class that needs to be interrogated, not hated, not trashed, but rendered accountable. They keep me and you accountable, right? They figure you and I, we're responsible for Bush. We're responsible for Trump when we support the third party. Keep me accountable. I want to hear your argument. Now, how did my vote in Massachusetts and New Jersey, the state that went completely with your Democratic candidate, somehow make it possible for this Republican to win? Let's be accountable and answerable. Let's have a conversation. But we're going to keep you accountable, too. That's what they don't like.
No,
that's what they don't like. And the young folk, you see, you and I know that if American citizens under 40 were the only ones who could vote, Bernie would have won last time and this time.
Right.
Because the young folk can't stand the viciousness of the neo-fascist ring of the ruling class with Bush, with Trump.
Yeah.
And they see through the hypocrisy of the milquetoast neoliberal wing of the ruling class with Biden and Clinton and Obama. They see through it. And they're right to see through it. Now, what we got to make a case for, though, is we can't have the young folk just dropping out and becoming apolitical. You've got to remain politically involved and participate in a variety of different ways. It's not going to be just a matter of which way you vote. We're talking about how you live your life. It's a marathon, not a sprint. We're talking about ways in which you're going to be counter voices against predatory capitalism, against white supremacy, against imperial policy, from now until your death. That's the question of what kind of human being you're going to be. Like, oh, Brother West, it just doesn't look like we gonna win. You don't say. You don't say. You're not in this just to win overnight. You're in this to be part of a force for good that has the possibility of being triumphant because you are playing a part. And it's always open-ended. Always. And we won't even get to the Christian version of which the forces for good, for the most part, be lied on, misunderstood, crucified, or assassinated. That's also part and parcel of the human condition, too. And that's a real possibility, too. But then it bounces back, even after whatever form the death takes. That's what Easter's about. It bounces back. The blood at that cross constitutes drops of love tied to justice that people remember the sacrifice of all of those folk who came before and decide they're going to do the same thing to their generation, and they pass it on to the next generation. That's the history of struggle. That is the history of movement. That's the history of moral witness. That's the history of spiritually being tied to something in the world but not of the world, and being willing to serve the least of these and pay whatever price it takes in order to be that force for good you have been called to be. Then you do it with smile, with style, with self-criticism, with laughter, with humor, brother.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, what a beautiful way of being in the world in such grim and bleak circumstances and conditions. And let's be very clear, it has always been bleak. It has always been grim for poor people.
Yes.
For black people in America, for indigenous people. For the white poor, even when too many held on to their whiteness as a way out. And yet, the best of the traditions that all of those people have produced have been traditions that have been tied to, back to the Beethoven question, that love of neighbor, justice, beauty, goodness, and those who are religious, be they Muslims, be they Christians, be they Jews, or any other religious or love of the holy. But that's an option. I mean, I love God and the Holy, but I got deep connections to secular comrades and secular sensibilities, even as I hold out for Jesus.
Will you, Cornel? Will you go back through the early on when we were recording here at the beginning? You brought up the Beethoven analogy.
Oh yes.
Will you go through that again? Because I thought that I heard it on my end, but I thought it was very profound. And if you just don't mind giving us that again.
Yeah, well, Beethoven raises the question: how do we muster the
Beethoven, right? Beethoven.
Yeah, this is Ludwig. This is the great Ludwig himself.
You're quoting Beethoven.
Absolutely. Well, I'm adding muster the courage, because he just says to look unflinchingly at the ugliness and evil in the world and still love it. That's Beethoven in his journal.
Wow.
I'm adding a little blues dimension to it. And I'm saying to muster the courage to look unflinchingly at the ugliness, the evil, the greed, the corruption, the hatred in the world, the suffering in the world, the misery in the world, and then muster the courage to still love the truth that is also connected to that world, the goodness that's connected to that world, the beauty that's connected to that world, the holy that's connected to that world, and then say, no matter how despair seems to overwhelm me, it will never, ever have the last word. That's the key. Goethe used to say, he or she who has never despaired has never lived. That's Goethe. You see what I mean?
Yes.
And it's nothing wrong with despairing. It means that you have a sensitivity. It means you have a acute perception of what is going on. The suffering and misery in the world does lead toward a wrestling with despair. It's like Dostoevsky and the brothers Karamazov. Yes, we do wrestle with overwhelming absurdities tied to cruelties and mendacity and so forth. And I love the way you started our dialogue, my brother, because when you talked about the virus that's connected to coronavirus, and then talked about the fascist virus in White House Republican Party and right-wing, cold-hearted media, and then broadened it out to the larger virus, the system that we inhabit and find ourselves in. And the great Audre Lorde used to always say, we've got to look at the piece of oppression inside of us. Even Foucault talked about the spiritual fascist inside of us, what I call the gangster inside of us in the Christian sense. And that has to be wrestled with and tried to extricate, even though you never fully extricate it. But that's the only way you can break the back of the fear that is the basis of our being deferential to a neoliberal status quo, a neo-fascist status quo. Break that fear and at the same time be willing to love. The only thing that breaks the back of fear is love, no problem. That's the only thing that breaks the back of fear. Very much so. And so in the end, it's not going to be just a matter of, trying to argue over Biden versus Green Party or Biden versus Third Party, Biden and staying home and so forth. It's just a brief moment, and that's my own sense of being part of an anti-fascist coalition, that if it requires, especially being in a state that's a state where the voting is tight, then having to somehow vote for a milquetoast neoliberal that has been tied to some very, very unacceptable and ugly policies to push out a fascist, good God Almighty, that's part of a price to pay. But don't do it in such a way that somehow you're thinking that you're voting for some major force for good in a positive way. It's negative. It's over against, And I know Chris Hedges and the others who I love and I have great respect for, if they disagree, Brother Chris is arguing that Biden is more dangerous than Trump. He just says don't view Biden as a solution. He's absolutely right. But whether he votes for Biden or not, he's still my brother and my comrade. You know what I mean?
Yeah. The right. No, but this is
the Revolutionary Communist Party. I'm gonna love that brother to death. Even when I disagree, he doesn't believe it all because he doesn't believe in the system. But when he's out there marching, I'm marching with him. But I'm not a communist. I'm not. I'm a revolutionary Christian. So we have these differences, but we're still able to have some overlap. Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, Chris Hedges is a close comrade in the way that Biden and the Bidenite could never really be politically. I'm talking politically.
Right.
So that they're on the other side of the class war that's taking place. We're at war. We're at war.
And so what you're saying here is a version of the by any means necessary, that if one of those means has to be voting for somebody that supports the things that we don't support, if the anti-fascist action that we all must take this year to remove that from the White House requires by any means necessary, which means that term means that you may need to use a means that you don't necessarily agree with, that you don't necessarily like.
Very true,
but nonetheless,
very true.
If we're looking at the short term and the long term, in the short term, we have a virus in the White House, and it must be eradicated nonviolently at the polls and removed.
That's exactly right. And there we are acknowledging the degree to which the milquetoast, mediocre, and ways in which neoliberalism has been tied to repression and class superior hierarchy and all of that ugliness, it is still anti-fascist enough to want to push out of fascism. I'm anti-fascist. I want to push out of fascism. We do have that particular moment of common ground.
And this despair that you talk about, that I brought up at the beginning, that people listening to this right now know exactly what because they're feeling it. They're feeling this despair. But your suggestion here is that not so much that we have to wrestle with the despair, but maybe I'll just put it in my own words, that we see the despair as a gift. It's something that we embrace. We hug that despair and use our power that all of us have in us, the power of love, to first of all, not let the despair control us, that we control it. As you said, it proves that we are a feeling people, that we have care in us, we have empathy in us, but we must win, not the despair.
Yeah.
And I'm so worried that so many people now we'll call it post-Bernie, but it's not really post-Bernie, because Bernie and his ideas, first of all, his ideas have won the day as far as I'm concerned, and we will see, especially after this pandemic, many of the things that he is fighting for they're a no-brainer now with people. I've talked to people, I think a lot of us we went back to using the telephone in the last few weeks, and we're calling friends and talking to people, and it's kind of nice. And everybody's like, even people I know that they're not necessarily, as far as I am on these things, it's like a no-brainer to them about universal healthcare for all. They're like, and nobody should have to worry about paying for it. And obviously the government can pay for it, and the government will tax people for it, mostly the rich. And we're all going to pay less than we do now.
Absolutely. I mean, the virus has just exposed this in such a major.
It's been completely exposed.
The veil has been stripped off. But let me just say one word about this despair, though, brother, because I think in many ways you're probably tied much closer to the rich Catholic tradition, and I'm tied to the funky Protestant tradition.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the Irish.
The Aquinas and others, they have a conception of despair where both reason as well as passion work together. So the right kind of reason, which may not require as much intense wrestling, but allow us to hug and work through it with that rich Eucharist that's waiting on the other side. Whereas you see, we Protestants, especially left-wing Protestants, I'm talking about the left-wing Baptists and Anabaptists and Quakers and Mennonites. I know you got connected to the Mennonites, and so, the Mennonites, the folk who helped produce Rembrandt. You know what I mean?
Yes.
The level of despair you get in a great Rembrandt painting, a self-portrait, the return of the prodigal son. You just take a look at that in the middle of this catastrophe. You say, Rembrandt, left-wing Reformation. How you going to deal with that kind of despair, brother? You've been bankrupt. You were once the greatest painter, and now you're bankrupt. You're living with working people. You're pushed near the Jewish ghetto, so your Jewish Bride, another great painting of his. How you going to deal with that, Rembrandt? Well, it's going to be an intense wrestling, but it is a wrestling that goes beyond even a hugging, and it is a kind of gift, but it's more of a, what would be the right kind of word here, brother? It's more of acknowledging the effects of the devilish dimensions of our human condition. And we're on a battlefield, and the only way you can actually come out through it is going to be both making a leap, because it doesn't look like you're going to win, but having unbelievable fortitude, but recognizing the degree to which what you up against has tremendous power, mighty, but it is not almighty. And that's a little bit closer to my funky left-wing Protestant than your rich, embracing, hugging. Now, I think it's tied to your rich Catholic formation. I'm not putting down the Catholic formation.
When I say hugging, I don't mean like hug it out or some warm and fuzzy thing. I'm talking about you have to
despair as a gift.
You have to, yes, and you have to wrap your arms around it, and you have to hold it in place, and you have to stop its violence, and you have to stop the inhumanity of it, and you have to stop it hurting those who can't fight back. I mean, this is, I have to, this is a lesson. I learned this lesson in second.
Beautiful, man.
Well, I learned it in second grade. I ended up being the biggest kid in class all through grade school, tallest, biggest, right? So the bullies didn't pick on me. They left me alone. I looked like too much trouble, even though I was not. I was not. You know, the bullies would go pick on one of the little kids, and I go and I'd step in between them, and I just look at the bully. I give him the kind of the stink eye, like, are you really going to continue with this? And if the bully did start to reach out to me, and start flailing, you know, his fists or his arms, I would wrap my larger arms right around his whole body, and I'd hold him in place, and he'd struggle to get out, and I wouldn't let him loose. And I'd say, you have to stop, in my second grade voice. You have to stop. And I'm not going to let you go until you stop. And so it looked like a hug, and the nuns would be like off down and they'd look at what's going on over there. Oh no, that's just little Michael hugging one of the boys. And but what I was doing was stopping his violence to this little kid, and they would stop. They would calm down, and they'd stop flailing, and I'd let go, and I'd like, come on, let's play marbles, you know, let's do that. And that was kind of, I look back now and I think about, you know, how do things begin in anyone's life? But I remember thinking of using, I guess, I used to think it was a drawback being the tallest or the biggest or whatever, but I started using it to the advantage of stopping the bullies, essentially. And I didn't, there was no thought process behind it. I can't even claim a faith-based ambition here. It was just, I just didn't like it. I didn't like.
Well, you could imagine, though, brother, that the victims of the bullies having that anger. You know that wonderful line in Audre Lorde's essay on anger. Anger is the libation for the fallen sisters. That anger becomes a righteous indignation. That it complements your ability to stop it. But the folks who have been thoroughly victimized by it, they've got to come to terms with the anguish and agony inside of them. And so that righteous indignation, like Jesus in the temple running out the money changers there in Jerusalem, that it becomes a way in which not revenge, not hatred, not contempt for persons, but the contempt for the injustice, the loving of the sinner and the hating of the sin that is enacted in such a way that it still, I think, has it has a certain kind of warlike quality, warlike quality, and that that wonderful essay by William James, the moral equivalent of war. We got to learn how to go to war against injustice, war against poverty, war against imperialism, war against white supremacy, male supremacy. But how do you do it in such a way that you don't become victimized by hatred and a contempt that is inside of you that devours the best of your own soul? Because you've got to be equipped. You've got to be fortified.
Well, isn't that where art and the creative side of us come in? Isn't that where,
That's right.
Because whether it's hip hop or whether it's humor, comedy, whatever,
That's right.
I mean, I've always said this, some of our greatest comedians, Richard Pryor, Charlie Chaplin, were some of the angriest people. And
Absolutely.
they figured out how to use their, yes.
Some of the most traumatized.
Most traumatized, right.
Absolutely. But I tell you though, brother, that people don't understand the way in which your artistry is shot through with a magnificent sense of humor and the comedy. It's right there on the screen. It's artistically depicted in very nuanced ways. And it's one of the ways that you make connection with the humanity, even of the folk you disagree with. Because in the end, we're all headed to the worms. That is a profoundly human solidarity.
Right.
That our mortality can become a launching board for our solidarity. But that means we're in solidarity with all of the folk who are struggling all around the world against the forces that are trying to kill them psychically and economically and socially and so forth. And as long as we're around and there's a cloud of witnesses, though, brother,
yes,
the last word is not in, which means despair can never be the last word.
It must not be the last word. Absolutely
it must
not.
Not be, my brother. Not at all. And I know as long as you're around and I'm around, we going down swinging like Muhammad Ali and Ella Fitzgerald, my brother.
That's the truth.
If it ain't got that swing, it don't mean a thing. If it ain't got that swing, it got to have that love and justice in it.
That's exactly how I feel. And even in the midst of our isolation right now, what would you say to people? Because I've been telling people that a movement has been ignited. It's not going away because a candidate isn't going to be on the ballot. That you need to look at the big picture here, and millions and millions and millions of Americans have said quite clearly they are tired of living the way we've been living, and there must be change. And
absolutely.
So what can you or I or others, who have been helping Bernie and others to lead this movement, to facilitate this movement, what is it that we can tell people that we're going to do, but also what they can do and what they can do with us and we can do with them in the months ahead here, especially when we are able to somewhat come out of our isolation here?
I would say that we have not known one moment in human history where there have not been forms of death and dogma and domination that have been operating, losing sight of the humanity of people. And so the question becomes, here in this moment, there's still forms of death, forms of dogma, forms of domination that are operating. And we have to muster the courage to be willing to tell the truth about our past that connects us with those persons who were willing to serve and sacrifice, given the truth that they told. Oftentimes they were crushed, but they moved the movement further along. Now we have a moment as mortals, as human beings, to unflinchingly look at the death and dogma and domination and its connection to forms of suffering and misery and say, we want to be, in the language of the great John Coltrane, forces for good, that love supreme, that justice supreme.
So just before we close here, Cornel, I guess my last question to you is that a lot of people are hoping that the movement will continue, this movement that got ignited in these last months, and millions of people wanting to see fundamental changes in our system, in our society. I don't think that has gone away. In fact, I think it's probably grown because people have had the time to experience what they're experiencing now. You know, the fact that the number of African Americans dying in Michigan, in New York, the percentage, that they don't need to sort of ask the question on the mainstream shows. Well, why is that? It's like, really, aren't we beyond having to ask that question? It's because the people that serve us, the people that take care of us in the hospitals, in the grocery stores, in the places that are keeping us alive, the people that are working the line at Con Ed or the utilities or whatever, so that we can all have electricity during this time. Who's making sure that the water is getting from wherever it's coming from into our tap? You know, it isn't people that come from the other class, the wealthy class. It's the people that have less money that are keeping us all alive. And many of them are black and brown and not white, but many of them are also white and poor. And so I think for those who've had the privilege of being able to stay at home, and believe me, anybody with 2 kids right now is saying, what fucking privilege are you talking about? Because they're climbing the walls. But those of us who have had the privilege of being able to have some time at home, at least I can speak for myself, it has given me numerous hours to reflect, to think, to be inspired, to start writing down the next thing that I need to do, the next movie. The next movie is being written right now in the silence of this apartment. And then I've got another idea that's not a movie, something I've never done. Would I have the courage to actually do what I'm thinking of? This is what happens when you're encased in your quarantine. But so I think a lot of good is going to come out of this. I think as sad as the moment is, as many people as we're losing, that nobody feels good when they see the statistics that Chicago is 30% black, yet 70% of the deaths. You don't need a preacher, and you don't need anything to know in your heart of hearts not only how wrong that is, you also know why it is. And that I'm a beneficiary of that. I, sitting here in this apartment alone, I get to live. Others are dying so I can live? No. You know, I got to tell you, Cornel, I was thinking of writing this, and I thought, don't put this on social media because people will think you're nuts. But I actually thought during this whole time when there are all these nurses and all these healthcare people in the hospitals don't have the protective gear. And I thought to myself, and I wrote this down, and I said, I just want to state publicly, if you see me being wheeled in with the coronavirus, I do not expect you to give your life so that I can live. I do not. I just thought, why should they have to give their lives because the system that I'm part of and that I benefit from is going to kill them? No. I don't want their blood on my hands. And I don't expect anybody to take care of me unless they've got the protective gear so that they can take care of themselves. Now, I know that sounds like a madman talking, but I mean it from the deepest place in my heart that this system that you and I fight for to change, to make better, that we haven't gone far enough to the point where our brothers and sisters who are not paid enough, and I'm not talking about just the doctors and the nurses, I'm talking about all those other healthcare people in the hospital, do all the so-called lesser jobs. They are mostly, certainly here in New York City, they are black and they are brown. And they are not to die because I failed to get this system corrected enough to the point where they would at least have some gloves and a mask and a gown for when that day comes when I'm wheeled in there. They are not to die because of that. And I am in part responsible for this failure. I take that on myself. I know I've done a lot. I know that I've tried to do good, but it hasn't been enough. We can't go back to the old normal.
Oh, no.
That's over.
We're not going back to normalcy at all. With take time, though, brother, to re-fortify and rededicate ourselves to being faithful in life and faithful unto death for the struggle against the system that you're talking about. So no matter how grim it may be, we're not fighting it just because we think we can win in the next few years. We're fighting it because it's wrong, it's unjust, it's immoral, it's through the sight of the sanctity and dignity of everyday people, of poor people. That's what Black Lives Matter, Brown Lives Matter, Poor Lives Matter, Women's Lives Matter, Gay, Lesbian Lives, Trans Lives. That's what that means. The willingness to tell truths about that suffering and then to do something about it. And that's true no matter what color, no matter class, no matter what social orientation or gender one actually is. It's a human choice in that way. And there is no rebirth. There's no revitalization without forms of death and without forms of wrestling with what seems to be moments of debilitation, but we can bounce back. And I do, my brother, I want to wish you a happy birthday for next week, man.
Oh,
Another year, brother. Another year next week.
Another year, I know. Well, thank you for that. It's a thing more men should do to each other. Is acknowledge and remember their birthdays. And now, what is your birthday?
My birthday is the same day as Thomas Hardy, June the 2nd. Complicated and wrestling Gemini. That's what I'm told. I don't really follow that astrology that much.
It sounds good. It fits you, though.
The twins at each other. But brother, love you, man. Thank you for all this time.
No.
And stay strong, and God bless your loved ones, man. And we gonna come out swinging together. I've got a wonderful picture of us when we were there somewhere in New York City raising money for the breakfast school. And the brother Basil was saying that you got that picture too. I said, oh
yeah, I have it framed. I have it framed and hanging.
That framed picture. Oh, that was a wonderful moment, brother. We were swinging in, and that's 15 years ago. Oh, yes.
Well, we're going to come out on the other end of this, and with all the hundreds of thousands of people who are listening to us right now, I know they're going to be with us, and together we'll keep fighting for that better world. Thank you so much, Cornel, for this.
Thank you, my brother.
Thank you.
Stay strong. Love you.
Bye-bye. And that is Dr. Cornel West. I've known him for a long time, and he is so full of life and love and fight. He speaks exactly what he thinks. He doesn't try to sugarcoat it. He doesn't... You could be his best friend, but if you were messing up, he'd tell you. Again, the true sign of a true friend, because they care about you. They know that you're better than that. And that's who he is. I'm still processing everything I just heard. I'm grateful for what he said, and I'm grateful to you for being part of this, to the over 8 million people that have downloaded this podcast since December 17th and listened to it. Thank you, all of you, for that. What he said about the despair is true. It cannot win. It's there. Acknowledge it. It's a sign that you have feelings, that you're affected by what's going on. But we have our work cut out for us now and after this is over. And I think that, what I've told you from the beginning, since I started talking about this pandemic, well over, I probably first was talking to you about it 2 months ago, back in February. And doing my own research, making my own calls to my own sources in our medical establishment, in our government, and telling you early on that this was not going to be a 1 month thing, a 2 month thing. And the recent news here in the last couple of days that, finally, the politicians, some of them are starting to acknowledge what I've known for a couple of months, what I was told by somebody very connected and high up in the NIH, National Institute of Health. This is at least a 2-year pandemic. There is no guarantee of anything at this point. That's when despair hears that, despair comes in the door with a big ass grin on its face because it's got us. It can't happen. It can't happen, and it won't happen in part because, if I can say this, you've got me. You've got me on the side of where we need to be and what we're going to fight for. You've got Cornel West. You've still got Bernie. You've still got a lot of people. And you know what? Let's hold out some kind of hope here that we'll have a piece of Biden with us too. In part because you and I both know so many, and some of you are actually listening to this, who have supported Biden all along or ended up finally supporting him. You're good people. I know what you want. I know the world you want to live in. And so if he understands that you're his supporters, a smart politician does what the people want him or her to do. So make your voices heard. And then we'll fight for the best. Not just hope for the best, fight for the best. Okay, my friends, that's it for Rumble today. And I will see you again soon. There are things afoot that are going to be announced by yours truly here right after, I think, maybe possibly as soon as right after the weekend. So please tune in, check in for that. Check my social media too. I can't talk about it today, but we'll see. Maybe I can, maybe I'll have a surprise for you at the beginning of the week. I'll leave it at that. Thanks, everybody. This is Rumble. I'm Michael Moore, and we'll talk soon.